I've been asked by Friends of Sabille to reflect on the Sabra and Shatila massacres of September 1982 and thought it would be helpful to provide a little context. And my role in this is very marginal, but I'll just bring that in because it helps shape that context a little bit. I was in Beirut at the invitation of some Palestinians, the Middle East Council of Churches, in July '81, after a 3-week war between Israel and the PLO. And we saw unbelievable devastation, and the tensions were really at quite a high crescendo. Then I had organized a delegation of academics, clergy, and we went over 35 of us and went all over Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine in January '82. And at that time, everyone expected an imminent Israeli invasion of Lebanon. At the end of that July war, a truce had been negotiated between the PLO and Israel that was brokered by the Saudis that was to be a non-aggression truce. The PLO pretty much held to that because they were fearful of a mass Israeli invasion. But by UN count, there were over 1,100 Israeli violations of that treaty by land, air, sea, and so the expectation of an invasion was quite high. I took another delegation of relief and development people in June of '82, and we were there and had a ringside seat when the attacks on the Palestinian camps began with airstrikes in June 4th. We were trapped in that invasion, and it was brutal the first week of June. Many of us were working all summer to try to get the truth out about what really was going on. And that was a 3-month-long war where Israel basically defeated the PLO but did not enter fully into Beirut. The U.S., Israel, the Lebanese government, such as it was, the PLO, negotiated a truce at the end of August, whereby the Palestinian militias and all the Palestinian administration, which was extensive in Lebanon, would withdraw. And they began to pull out at the end of August and early September. In the truce that was negotiated, Israel would secure Beirut, and the U.S. would send forces in, and they would be responsible for the unarmed Palestinian, the sizable community of refugees in the refugee camps and the Palestinians in Lebanon. They were responsible for their security, and that the PLO pushed for, and that was written in the agreement. Then events happened quite quickly. As Israel had long planned, a Christian militia leader, Bashir Gemayel, of the Phalangist Party, largely a Maronite but not entirely, became president of Lebanon in late August. He had barely assumed office when on September the 14th, a massive explosion took place in the Phalangist headquarters in West Beirut, East Beirut, and he was killed along with 26 of his militia leaders. No one knows to this day who did that. Of course, his followers were just filled with rage and wanted revenge. The next day, September the 15th, the Israeli Defense Minister, Ariel Sharon, and the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, Rafael Atan, and other generals from Israel met with the Phalangist leaders and agreed on a plan whereby the Phalangists would be allowed into the camps. Now, Israel had secured the whole perimeter of the camps and had surrounded Beirut at that point, and they were responsible for security. But this was agreed to, despite the sense that Israeli leaders had to know that these people wanted blood. They were allowed into the camps a day later, the evening of September the 16th. By accounts from journalists, they went in about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. I was in flight then with two other Friends from Mercy Corps, where we were taking proposals to the Middle East Council of Churches to work on the refugee crisis and closer relations between Middle East churches and evangelicals. We were in flight and didn't know that the massacres had begun. In fact, the world didn't know because journalists had been kept out. Later it was told, and I interviewed people in the camps when I went in, that the Israeli army put up flares overnight so the massacre could continue into the evening. That massacre went on through early Sunday morning by best calculations. We arrived on Monday morning. We had to come in by boat because the Beirut airport had been bombed and closed since early June. And we rushed down to the Middle East Council offices and were told immediately, head for the camps, something horrible has happened. We walked in from the southern entrance and we were dropped off by a taxi and went by a 7-story apartment building that the Israelis had control of. And in fact, it was about less than a football yard field length, less than 300 feet from the camps. With their high-powered binoculars, they could see everything that was going on. 7-story building, they commanded that from the rooftop. In fact, there were reports later by a French Jewish correspondent that the Israeli army met with the Phalangist leaders while the massacre was going on. And Amnon Kapeliak was a writer, and he said that we had a ringside seat for all the events that took place and could see everything. We went in a day after the massacres ended, and as we entered, a Red Crescent worker handed us a handkerchief and dumped cologne on, and we had to hold it over our mouths because the stench of death was so intense it just made you sick to your stomach. And that was nothing compared to what we would then see. We saw Red Crescent and Lebanese relief workers pulling out bodies and pieces of bodies. I got to interview 3 or 4 people who had just come back to see who survived from their families. And one said that he talked to a survivor who played dead next to the bodies of his family. And he said that the Lebanese militias that came in had sliced off arms and fingers and stole the jewelry. He sensed that they were high on drugs, but they were just drunken with rage. I interviewed an imam and several other Red Crescent leaders. They sensed that there were well over 2,000 to 3,000. The imam said maybe 4,000. Nobody will ever know. I sat by a mass grave that the Red Crescent had dug and counted over 800 body bags in one grave, and there were at least 2 of those graves. The reports of what took place by the Phalangists was not only revolting, but it was unspeakable. I won't even go into some of the graphic details. But I think the point is that the Israelis knew everything that was going to take place before they arranged for the meeting, unleashed the militias, knowing full well that these were bloodthirsty militia leaders who wanted revenge for the death of Bashir Gemayel, and it took place. We've seen Waltz with Bashir, who's been out, and I think the Israelis are beginning, some, to grapple with their guilt over their responsibility for this. But the film comes up short because it really puts all the blame on the Phalangists. In fact, I remember Menachem Begin was interviewed by the Israeli press. And by the way, the largest demonstrations against the war in Lebanon and the massacres took place in Tel Aviv by Israelis who were enraged by what had happened. And Begin said, oh, this is just Goyim killing Goyim. These are just Gentiles killing Gentiles. That's what you expect. We're not responsible. The government of Israel took out full-page ads in the Washington Post and the New York Times that week saying this was a blood libel to accuse Israel of having any responsibility for this. So looking back, we're on the eve of peace talks, and here we are with these same refugees still in Lebanon with no place to go. The right of return, will it or will it not even be discussed? There still is no peaceful settlement. You wonder why the Palestinians mistrust dialogue and words and promises after we've been through not only massacres but the Oslo Accords as the occupation intensifies. So I think we in the Christian community and thoughtful Jews and Lebanese, all of us, Muslims, we must join together to not only demand the truth, but to recognize the victimization of the Palestinians, and that Israel too will never be secure until it deals honestly with these issues and justice comes for the Palestinians. So may these remembrances be a reminder for us of this difficult, sordid history, but how much we must stand with those who are suffering, bring the truth to light, and make sure that we call our government into accountability for its complicity in all of this.